this as well.
All right. So, hi everyone. I'm Justin, and we also have Blythe and Allilsa here today, and they'll introduce themselves in a moment. But first, I'll kind of explain what the panel is about. So, we are trying to like kind of springboard off of our last panel, which was sort of a general overview of mental health and mental illness. So this time we're gonna focus in more on a few specific topics within mental health. So the first one is decolonizing mental health, and the second one is coping strategies for creative burnout. So we'll start with decolonizing mental health. So first, we can have you guys introduce yourselves, and then I'll introduce myself.
Blythe, you want to go?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Blythe. Nice to meet you. I am a tactical consultant as well as multi-genre composer, and I love anything and everything that's business related to creative or trying to be creative when I can. We'll talk about that later. I've placed my original toy with Mattel. My album Synesthetic debuted at number 7 on Broadway's vocalist charts and Amazon's Broadway and vocalist charts. And I also got to participate in a cool virtual reality collaborative between Harvard, MIT, and Berklee College of Music, where I graduated from. So thank you for being here today, and thank you for listening to me.
Hey everyone, my name is Allilsa. I don't have a fancy background like Blythe. I'm just a peer for mental health, and I'm a mental health and a disability advocate.
Cool. So I'm Justin Ashbrook. I'm currently a business student at Berklee College of Music, and I hope to start a comic book store when I graduate next year. And in addition, I'm also a YouTuber, a webcomic writer, and a pianist. So now that we know who everyone is, we can get started with our first topic, which is decolonizing mental health. So the first question is, decolonizing mental health implies that mental health is colonized. So what exactly does that mean? I know it can mean a few different things for different people, but what does this mean in pertaining to our discussion?
Yeah. So decolonizing mental health and even art, it means that our perception of our world, of our society, whether it's mental health or art, is based on the white perspective. We were colonized by white people and Europeans. So we have the mentality that's been passed down by them, which is cisgender, white, and skinny. So in a lot of the arts, for example, you don't see fat characters, or you can count how many times there are fat characters, or people of color, how many times the characters are of color. Predominantly, they're pink skin or purple or green. They choose all these other colors, but brown and black, you can count how many times it's really seen. So it's this mentality that white supremacy is the way that we think when it comes to mental health and art.
Yeah, or if they actually are portrayed, brown and black people, they're kind of like negative portrayals, like, oh, they're savages or something like that.
Yeah.
Yes, there's the stereotypes.
Okay, so we established how mental health is colonized. So what does it mean to decolonize it, and what are some of the ways that we would go about that?
So decolonizing mental health is a part of art. You know, when we tell these stories, whether it's through music, performances, cartoons, drawings, making sure that is really intersectional and really diverse. Having non-binary characters, having transgender characters, having fat characters or people of color, but not as the killer or the villain, but in a really good light, is breaking away from that, because mental health has a lot to do with representation. If you're a kid and you're growing up and your cartoons are predominantly white, that messes with your brain. It's like, wait a minute, why am I not seeing myself? And when I'm seeing myself, I'm a bad person or I'm doing bad things. It really messes with us. And a lot of people don't see the correlation. Or fat phobia. You know, if I'm chunkier, what does that mean? I must be unhealthy then, or I must be a bad person or a bad eater, you know, and it really messes with us mentally. So decolonizing starts there. And then when we go in deeper into mental health, that means we're loving ourselves authentically as we are. I'm brown skin. I'm gonna love me as a brown person. I don't need to dye my skin. I don't need to speak what we call quote, quote, white. Hi, yes. You know, no, I can be like, yo, what up? So really showing up authentically as yourself, because when you struggle with seeing representation or having to show up as you, as a person that you're not, that really creates a mental struggle.
That's so true, especially, so I'm multiracial, and growing up, I never saw any characters that look like me. I have a background in international and domestic touring performance, mostly for singing and acting, and oftentimes I was like the token ethnic person, or like expected to do certain things because I'm 50% Chinese. And I think that it really gives me hope to see these new shows coming into place, like Central Park. The whole family that the entire plot is based on is multiracial, but that's not the plot point. They just happen to be multiracial. And I think seeing positive enforcement like that, you know, there's other people like you, you're not the only one, just because you don't see that, is really essential. And I think that's a really good point to bring up.
I'll say this, when I was growing up, I'm non-binary myself. And when I was growing up, it was hard to find cartoons that represented me without a dress, without the nice, cute hair or doing the makeups and the nails. And I'm like, oh my God, I feel foreign. I feel weird. Why? Where am I? Where do I fall? Until I saw Recess, the cartoons Recess, and Spinelli was a tomboy, and she's kicking the ball, and she's playing with the boys. I'm like, yes, I feel represented. And it really helped with my mental health, because I'm like, oh my God, I don't have to hide who I am. I'm not this weird person. Look at Spinelli. She's doing it. She's wearing the jeans, and you know, she's like, no, I'm tough. and so having that representation is mental health, you know.
Cool. So kind of talking about the current way that the mental health system works, can social workers, therapists, peer specialists, and other workers involved in mental health, can they work within the current system and take steps to decolonize mental health?
Yeah, so I don't think that, and this is my own personal opinion,
Yeah.
I don't think that therapists and social workers, if people are looking for therapists that, you know, they want to do this decolonizing work where you're loving yourself 100% who you are, I don't think the therapist with the system is going to be helpful, because the system itself is colonized. And what I've seen is the therapists that are doing the work of decolonize mental health, unfortunately, are found outside of the system. So they have their own practice, most likely. And then sometimes that's not accessible because of income, and now you can't afford it. So I hope to see what these uprisings that are happening, that people are going into their own practice and speaking about decolonizing mental health. I hope that that takes way, so then insurances are able to cover it, or it's more affordable for people who can't afford a $50 session, and then they can begin doing the work of self-loving, you know, who you are authentically.
Can you explain what you mean when you say working within the system versus like working outside the system?
Yeah, so the system itself is rooted in white supremacies, like it's cis, straight, white. So a lot of the books, if you look like at DBT books or cognitive therapy books, it specifically says he and she. And specifically the material is not tailored for people of color, and it's not tailored for non-binary or transgender people. It doesn't even consider them. So this is what these therapists are taught from the get-go. And then now they go into practicing and they have clients who are transgender or non-binary or people of color, and they're like, what am I supposed to do? So that's what I'm talking about, the system. The system already trained them to think a certain way. So when you get to intersectionality, they might not even know what that means or how to even address certain things. Like right now as a peer, I'm coming across a lot of people who are struggling mentally because of the protest. You know, it's for many of them, it's the first time that they're confronted with race, even though they've lived with race all their life. And they're like, oh my God, I'm really depressed, I'm frustrated, I'm having anxiety, you know, and where do you turn? Who do you speak to? And so that's part of decolonizing mental health and the spaces. And also with art, like if you look at it from the artistic side, you know, being intentional to create whatever you're creating to be inclusive, whether that's music or art or performances. You know, a lot of musicians still use he and she. I fell in love with him. I fell in love with her. Rarely do you hear they were the love of my life, you know, or they speak about transgender relationship. And where they are, they're categorized as LGBTQIA artists, not mainstream artists, because we still have this colonized mentality is you are in either boxes. And the same thing with characters is indie movies, indie film, indie comic books, because mainstream is still very colonized.
That's so true. I especially see this with like music and performing arts, where if you fall into like one of these things, it's not considered like mainstream, then you're just like, oh, that's an indie artist. And the people will be like, oh, Blythe, you write indie jazz, right? And I'm like, no, I write in 13 genres. Like just because this or like my content doesn't match what's on the radio sometimes doesn't mean it's not mainstream.
Yeah. I was watching a video recently from Council of Geeks, who was here a few days ago for the Doctor Who panel, where they made the point that the media the media has a lot to do with like that whole like labeling thing. Like if there's like an LGBT character or something like that in a film, they'll make a really big deal out of it, and like that's like the big headline. So like so the fact that it is newsworthy means there aren't enough of those characters to so we should have enough characters where every time there is another one, like it's not like a whole like article about it, you know what I mean?
Definitely, like these things should not be like anomaly, because it happens more in real life than it happens in art, and that's kind of odd because art's supposed to be a reflection of reality.
Yeah. So so our a lot of people here are students. So if students are entering a career in mental health, um, how are they, like, how can they be exposed to um, mental health that's decolonized, or kind of like more, like having a more diverse audience, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so really ensuring, and this goes like for artists, performers, and so forth, ensuring who are you following? What are you reading? You know, because if your bookcase is predominantly or entirely white people, white authors, how are you going to learn about other people and really comprehending the culture, the intersections? It's impossible, you know, and without calling it the other or indie. Like it just is. That should, to me, that should be the norm, you know. Who are you following? A lot of the times when we follow mainstream, if you look at it, there's a lot of whiteness in there in comparison to people of color or in comparison to LGBTQ. So like, who are you following and what are they saying so that you can learn from those people and you can be better equipped to know about cultures, about intersections, which means like gender and sexualities and things like, and disabilities. So things like that. Like ensuring that who you're following is very diverse.
I totally agree. I think that it's important to have role models that share your perspective, and especially ones that don't share your perspective, because you're apt to learn more about how you can help others better. You'll even learn more about yourself, coming from a perspective that's different from, I guess, pretty much everyone I associate with. I consider that a big privilege because I have more to be able to take in from them and maybe more to give to them in that way too.
So, if you're a person of color or LGBT person or in some kind of minority group, how do you like, and you want to find like the right kind of help, the right kind of therapist that kind of knows what you're going through and can help your specific situation, like what are some resources to be able to find that?
There's a group called Latinx Therapy, Black Therapy. There's even Black Men Therapy. So really like Googling specifically to what you're looking for, LGBTQ network, you know, who you're really wanting to work. And then they have listings and you can go buy insurance. That's the safest bet, but understanding that they still work for the system because of the insurances. So if you wanted to find a decolonized like a therapist that's into decolonizing mental health, then I would suggest like this is going to sound weird, but looking in Instagram like under the hashtag decolonizing mental health, and then they can make reference because it's still a work in process. Like we're barely starting to see this work taking place.
Cool. So I know like most people watching are probably not like involved, like they're maybe not like mental health activists or they're not in the healthcare industry. So how can people like that help with this and like help to decolonize mental health?
So I would say the same thing like earlier, just being mindful. And I think you hit the bucket, Justin, with that. You said making sure that we have enough diverse cartoons that it's not newsworthy. If it's still newsworthy, that right there tells you how far we have to go. Like we shouldn't say the first. Just recently, the first superhero LGBTQ or the first Black superhero. Like it shouldn't be a news article thing. Black Panther was a big hit because it was like the first Black all cast. Why is that a thing? Like it shouldn't be a thing. If we were really, really intersectional and we were really diverse, that wouldn't be news. and we will really have representation all across. So making sure like each and every one of us has the power, especially if we're using social media, to represent that diversity. Like I intentionally make sure that if I'm reposting and resharing, I'm going to share people from all different walks of life, not just white. I'm going to make, and not just people with degrees. Like if they're homeless, I'm going to share that. If they are low income, I'm going to share that. Like making sure it's all walks of life, not just what I think will be, I don't know, like really good or stand out the best, you know? So that way there's really diversity represented.
I think I definitely agree with all of that. And another way to add on to it is to, I think back to what Allilsa was saying earlier, to really feel comfortable with your voice and feel like it, you know, don't be ashamed to be yourself in your art or be yourself in someone else's art. Like you don't have to conform to a specific way because of all the labels that are applied to you. You can have your art take on its voice and inspire others, maybe to do the same for their own voices because you are authentic.
Yeah, definitely. All great ideas. So, last question for this section is, what can white allies and other people who are in like groups of privilege help with colonizing mental health? I know you mentioned like be mindful of everything. I think that's important. So what are some ways that we can do that?
Ensuring that white folks, white allies step back. Don't be afraid to step back and amplify someone else. You know, I think white people have this misconception that if they step back and they give space to a person of color, then the person of color is going to hijack it entirely. And they don't realize that we can share the mic. We can share the space. We can share the table. And that's what we're asking for. So making sure that when you're using your social media, you're conscious to amplify marginalized and multi-marginalized people. I've seen Instagrams of influencers who are white and they go on sharing other people's stuff and it's white, cis, straight, white, cis, straight, white, cis, straight. So, I mean, you have to be intentional and ensure that there's diversity of what you're sharing and also what you're creating. Who are you creating with? When you invite someone to perform, is it always white, cis, straight? You know, or are you inviting people across the board from different backgrounds? When you're painting, are you elevating people of color, for example, who has a workshop and you are partnering with them? Who are you partnering with? So using that privilege, that power to amplify people who don't have that power and be willing to share that space.
I totally agree about sharing the mic. I think it's really important just to listen to everyone because then you can be more intentional about what you're putting out there. I actually am a product influencer, and I think so most of the things that I repost, my followers know what I put out there for my identity that might or might not be my authentic self. That's up to the, it's the web. We have to be careful, but I try to always make sure to follow, if I associate with people and I like their artwork and they're different from me, I will actually make a point to share it when they have something I really like, because I think that it's just what you should do as a person. Like, if you enjoy something, then you need to share it with other people, especially if they have a voice that is maybe underrepresented like yours, or even more underrepresented than yours. It's the right thing to do. I think I've had the benefit of a lot of people representing me when I couldn't say anything. So I want to do the same for others.
And I see in the chat some really good questions as well. Wanted to mention them.
Yeah. Yeah, if we want to do like Q&A just for this section first before we move on to the other section, I think that could work.
Yeah.
So
There's
Ariel,
three.
yeah, I can just like read them.
Okay.
Ariel asks, do you think colonization would also apply to non-human characters?
Oh, big yes.
Yes. Yes. To name a few, black magic, which is bad, or what's the other ones? Oh, like when they make a character, but it's not human, it's like an animal or this monster, but somehow they're brown or black. So yes, yes, I think life might have other examples.
That's so true. Like, okay, so I even see this in some shows that I really like. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because you can also do it in a positive way. So I'm like a huge Star Trek fan, and all the alien races, they all kind of pertain to different continents, countries, cultures on Earth. Sometimes they do it really well, like Vulcans, the ones that Mr. Spock with the pointy ears, are supposed to symbolize Asian culture, is what I've heard. So they're very temperate, calm, and even though those are some negative stereotypes enforced on us from time to time, for the most part, it's highlighting good parts of specifically traditional Japanese culture. They also messed up a few times. I don't know if anyone has seen the episode Code of Honor, but they have these African, like exactly like they're not African, but they're like supposed to be somehow. And then they enslave a white female officer, and that's like highly regarded as one of the worst episodes of Star Trek, which I agree with. I don't actually watch that one. So I think you can be good, like you can be a Vulcan, or it's just sometimes gets really like stuff that you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, I think one example of a positive example of non-human character in media would be Martian Manhunter, and I think specifically the version from the Supergirl show. So he's a shapeshifter, and when he's like in his regular form, he's just a green Martian alien. And then when he's like interacting with regular people, he's a black man. And I think and he's one of the most powerful people in that whole Arrowverse universe. Like he's like psychic and he can like fly and all that, and he's like a really well done character. So I feel like there should be more non-human characters like that. Okay, so let's see. Um, so Ariel again asks, do you have any thoughts about the term Latinx? As a Latina, I'm a bit torn on it because I identify as non-binary, even though my culture is heavily gendered, and the Latinx term does make me feel more included. And yet Latinx was something imposed by a white idea of intersectionality. I don't really have an answer, but I was just wondering if you guys had any thoughts.
Yeah, I too wonder about it because there's this whole big discussion on this as well. Because if you go to Latin countries, that doesn't even exist. Latinx doesn't even exist for the most part. Like only a small part who has traveled knows about Latinx. And there's still a lot of discussion like, how do you call tia on in non-binary terms, or uncle. So all of these things are still up in the wings. And so I truly understand where you're coming from. And I think that as we move forward with language, we'll be able to also decolonize that. But I think we're in the beginning stages because we barely started to define non-binary. And I say barely because, again, it was colonized. Back then there was two spirits, and this has always existed in our cultures. But because we were colonized, we were shut from it. We was made to believe it's only cis. And so we had to find, what is the language now then? What do we call this? And I guess we're still exploring those terms. So I can see why that's happening too. And
Yeah,
I'm still exploring myself.
and Brianna brought up a great point. The Spanish language is very centered on feminine masculine tropes, so it's like a little bit harder for that's fine. It's a little bit harder for Spanish to have general neutral terms because it's so like it focuses so much on like the feminine masculine terms. Yeah, and they could maybe make new terms to adapt it. Yeah, that's a great point.
That's so interesting how that translates to other languages. I've studied about 13 languages, mostly just to perform in, but I've noticed, especially with Chinese, not really in the characters because you have different radicals for male/female, but when you're speaking like just the word for somebody's pronoun, it's actually, I guess you could consider it kind of neutral because there's not a specific way that you say it for each gender. So I think it's
Yeah.
just an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah. I feel like that's a whole panel in itself.
Yeah, that would actually be really cool.
All right, so I think there's one more question here that I see comes from Emma Hindle. Where do you guys think the line is between representation and appropriation? I'm a white artist making stories and illustrations with diverse characters, and that's very important to me, but I also want to be conscious of the fact that things I want to represent aren't my own story, and I can never fully understand them.
And I want to finish off with where
Yeah, go ahead.
they said, where do you guys think the line is between representation and appropriation? And I wanted to read that because I think for for me, it's as simple as, are you listening to people with those stories? A lot of the times white people read books and look at films and then base it off of that. And BIPOC, we're like, oh no, they did not talk to somebody because this is messed up. This is so messed up. So that's appropriation. You took something that you thought was good and you thought was amazing and you went with it. Representation means you're going to sit down, for example, with Blythe and say, Blythe, would you like to share your story? And also when you create that character, be willing to give credit and say, I spoke to Blythe. This is how that character came about. To not, that's the difference between appropriation and representation, because one, you made it accurately because you had someone involved in that process. And two, you was willing to name or highlight someone that shared that story and gave birth to that character. And to me, it's as simple as that. But I don't know if other people have thoughts on it.
I don't think I could have said that better myself. It's
Yeah.
just about like being respectful and listening. So I know like I write a lot of blues music. So what I try to do is listen to actually where that music came from, because I'm American, European, and Asian. It doesn't come from any of those things. So I do my best to like do my due diligence and study the history. Like, where did it come from? It originated from here. It had all these roots. Who created it? It was created out of oppression by people that I personally wouldn't understand because I'm not part of the same narrative. So I want to do my job to try to see what they're saying, and then it might end up to be something completely different because the oppression that I experience is not the same and it's not about the same things. So it's just listening and being respectful. I think it's also a really fine line. Like, I have a lot of Japanese family friends, and I participated in the traditional Japanese dance where it's called odori, and they have you wear a special outfit for that. So there's kinds of kimonos, there's a yukata that goes with it too, and you have to like make sure to prepare it a certain way as you're getting dressed, otherwise it's disrespectful. So it's just doing your due diligence and saying, hey, like, you invited me to do this, thank you for including me in your culture. I want to know how to wear this garment the right way so that I can experience it the right way and be respectful of you.
Yeah, all that's great. Yeah, so I think those were all the questions we had. Yeah. Um, before we move into coping strategies for creative burnout, I just want to take a second to highlight our YouTube series, The Three of Us, where we look at a film through a mental health lens. The first episode of that is out now that we did for Justice League versus the Fatal Five. So we looked at characters who have mental health and mental illness and their portrayals. So definitely check that out if that's something you're interested in. Okay, so the next section we have, well, the only other section, second half, is coping strategies for creative burnout. So what is creative burnout and why do we need coping strategies for it?
Okay, so I would define creative burnout as, well, here's a very colloquial definition first. Have any of you ever felt like when you want to work when you're supposed to be doing art or something? Yeah, okay. So you know what I mean. So I'm going to put my brain to use now. I just really wanted an excuse to do that sound effect. Anyway, I would define creative burnout as just the lull down and lack of motivation and the almost lack of desire, it seems, to have a purpose to create or actualize any of these art pieces. So I think it can occur in many different ways. Personally, I am involved in 10 different projects right now. So if I don't actually, I have it right here. I have to do this with like, these are my paid projects. These are my things that could become paid projects. And then I have the tasks. So it's about like staying organized and balancing all that so that you don't get to that point of like mush, which I definitely was this week before I did this. So it can happen through just being part of too many things, or not even too many things, just a lot of things at once, because you don't want to limit yourself if you don't have to. But then again, it's okay to say no to things. Or it can happen with just not feeling inspired for whatever reason. And that, I feel like that's personal to everyone. So I wanted to just bring it up because it seems to be a very taboo subject, especially in the music community. Like if you mention so much as, oh, I went to an acting class instead of wrote a song today, it's just like, no, you don't do that, you know? And that's not normal. In order to make it as a creative, you have to have a lot of things in your belt, even if you are specifically professional to one industry within the creative industries. So I wanted to have this forum so that we could all openly talk about it and make it not a taboo issue, because if we can unlock even more creative potential, oddly enough, and communicate with each other on it.
And I will also add to that, when you have a mental illness too, like sometimes the burnouts can come out suddenly and you have to take a step back, and that's fine too. Like it definitely shows up that way too.
Yeah, I mean, like with me personally, I ultimately decided that I just couldn't play piano at the level that I was playing it because of the anxiety I was having from isolating myself. So you need to know yourself and like what your body is capable of doing.
That's so true. It's really important, because if you don't feel healthy, then you might not be in the best place to create or even able to create. I've experienced a lot of downtimes where I physically couldn't do music, and that's okay. You just have to know yourself and fill that in with other things, or know when to take a break.
Yeah, so Blythe, you show that like chart you had with all the organized things. So what are some examples of coping strategies that people can use?
So I think my biggest coping strategy is to diversify. I love a lot of different subjects. So if you're someone else that is like that, that might work for you. So if I'm working on something like a strategic plan and I'm getting tired of it, I will shut it off unless I have a deadline, and then maybe go write a chart or go work out or look at a script, or, do something that's not related to any of that. Just call up a friend. So diversifying can happen professionally or just in general. Like if you are doing one thing for too long and your brain is not able to sustain that, that's not a you problem. You just have to know that that's okay, and you can change the activity and come back to it. So that's my biggest one. Some other ideas are not forcing yourself to be creative, which I know is a really big problem for a lot of the people that are in my life, myself included. At times, we get these prompts from clients where we have to create a specific thing, and then we have our own project that we maybe are not feeling good about because we want to do the thing for the client first. So it's just trying to take the emotion out of the process can be difficult, although sometimes you just want to separate and say, okay, I'm going to do my best for my client and I'm going to do my best for myself, but I don't have to spend all day doing this if it's going to break me.
Yeah, and I would add to that too, like it's okay to take a break, even if you have like a deadline or something, or like you really need to finish it quickly. Like even just taking a break for like 5 minutes can help. Like if I'm like really feeling burnt out and I have to complete something within like a short amount of time, sometimes I just watch a show for like 5 minutes and then I go back to working, and even that can help. And yeah, even that can like help you to regain some of your creative, creative, or like able to work more.
I totally agree. Yeah.
And depending also too how you work, you can work around, and Justin, you said this, knowing yourself.
Yeah.
Like for me, I can't do times, like a scheduled time.
Right.
So freelance work, that's what works for me in my brain. So I know that my creative juices are going to happen when they happen, and the person is going to get what they get when they get it.
Yeah.
Versus I need this by 5 o'clock in the next 2 days. So I enjoy working at that level. It's not always that way, but being able to work in a freelance and taking up a job when I know that I can do it, that's more helpful than having consistent work. And this is just a matter of what Justin said, knowing what works for you.
Yeah, I totally agree with that too. I think another thing is to, I guess, really be conscious of your media consumption, because it can be unintentionally exhausting. Like if I listen to too much music, I can't focus. Or if I'm trying to work on something, I can't have too much other sound in the room. I'm synesthetic, so I see colors and textures with every sensory stimuli. So even like the air condition that's going on in the background, if I'm trying to record something, I have to really tune that out. So it's not a deficit if you don't spend 24 hours of your day living and breathing on one subject. Like if you're an artist, it's probably a visual artist. It's probably very, very exhausting to look at art for long periods of time without even, you're conducting an analysis unconsciously. It's exhausting for me to go to concerts or theater or keep watching that. So that's why I like sci-fi and cartoons, because it's a great escape into someone else's foray that I may subconsciously analyze or take part in, but it's not as intense.
Cool. So so moving into like when people have creative careers, and they have to create something for their job, what are some strategies that are more specific to when creating is your job, and maybe there's a deadline on it? So what are some ways to deal with that specifically?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, navigating that can be a real doozy.
Yeah.
That's how it is. I can't sugarcoat that. But there are certain ways to get around that. I find that if a client gives me a deadline, like, so I'll use last week. So I'm working on one of my projects is for an original children's storybook with a music and curriculum component for one of my close friends and clients. So I knew that I would have a rehearsal this week to learn 2 pieces of music. However, on top of that, I'm writing a curriculum plan. I just joined as a VP of another organization for education. I just joined another job that has something to do with realty. There's a jingle I have to write. I'm on the board of another nonprofit. There's another project, another one, my own project. So there is all that on top of it. So I'm like, okay, that's a lot. So you need to be realistic, and there's no specific way of organizing all this except for what works for you and your brain the best. For me, I like to have this visual thing, and then when I'm done with this, I can like take it off and throw it out, and it's really gratifying. So it's just prioritizing these things in order. Like, because I knew the rehearsal was this week, I decided to prioritize that, and then if the charts for my own thing get pushed back a little bit, that's okay. That's just because I had to focus on things as they came up. In terms of getting really specific for content creation, if you're feeling exhausted. So a good way to do it is to kind of purge content for a couple hours. So if I know that I'm going to be expected to produce a song or a jingle or something within the next 24 hours, I try to have absolutely no sound stimuli for a couple hours, just nothing, just like dump it out and do something that is not related at all. So then when I come back, it's kind of like a clean slate, and I will have actually the mental freedom to let myself have ideas for that project. So sometimes we don't have a couple hours, and in that case, you can always, I don't know how many other of you have some sort of idea notebook or a voice memo section. So if you really run out, sometimes the best thing that you can do is just go into your previous ideas and pull something out if it's just really not happening, and then adapt it to whatever the client's asking for.
And I guess this comes back to what we've been saying about knowing yourself. I know people who are even more creative with procrastination or deadlines. So there's this theory, like people can look it up. I think it's called procrastination personality A and personality B. So depending on the personality, if you are a last minute person, it can create more stress. And now you're really going to get burned out when you come off it. But if you're a person like me, I don't know, my brain starts really being productive at last minute. It's like, oh, like some of the best poetry that I've written and some of the best things that I've done artistically have been down to the wire. And coming off of it, I feel proud. I don't feel worn out, but I'm that second personality. Like I need that drive. I don't do that for every project though. Like it's not realistic. But also knowing, if that does happen, to know yourself, because sometimes that may work even more in your benefit. And I've known people who've created their best artwork, their best art piece when they're down to the T. So again, it's going back to knowing yourself and what type of person you are.
That's so interesting and relatable. I'm definitely going to look that up. I think I'm also type B.
They did a research, like they actually studied them, and based on the personality, if you're like type A, you can't do it. You really should have like construction and make your time and everything. And then if you're the second personality, it's like you perform at your best.
Yeah. And one thing I would add, and this is not specific to like having a creative job, it's just in general. I would say like getting a good night's sleep can really help. So just take whatever steps you need to make sure that you sleep well, like however much that is for you. Because it can really like your brain get like I find that I can like think much better, and I'm more creative when I sleep a lot. Yeah, so to what degree do you guys think that um, creative burnout is caused by creative industries? So like record labels for music, stuff like that.
I feel like what I'm about to say might be a bit controversial, but I kind of feel like the way that the creative industries are structured, they promote burnout. So, like to for I guess a personal story, I used to do a lot of Chinese TV on the circuit, mostly in LA, and then also I toured in China with that. And it is vicious. Like your schedule is, and I was in high school, so I was maybe 15 or 16, taking a lot of honors classes because I like to be academic, and I'm also very social. So having a life aside from that all as well too. You get up and then you go to school for this, and I went to a charter performing arts school. You go to school, you study academics, you do performance, then you go get in the car for 2 hours, and then you go perform. You get home at maybe 11 p.m. without eating the whole day, and then you have to do 3 hours of homework and then get up and do the next thing, and not to mention the difficult dance classes where if you are throwing up, you cannot sit out. So that I feel like that's just a microcosm of the way that the industry is in general. And especially if you're a front person, they don't allow breathing room for you. Like you don't have that. That's not a luxury that you get. So I think that it's really important to for front people as well as people that are not front people, because that also happens to bassists, drummers, guitar players, producers, songwriters. It's important for us to represent ourselves and say when enough is enough. Like I remember there was one time when I was performing in China and they locked me in a room without food or water for 8 hours. And after that, I never performed with them again, because that's not how you should treat a human being. So I think it can be very dehumanizing for performers especially, and that's something that systemically needs to change, and we can speak up about that. Or
I
boycott.
second that. Yeah. I second what Blythe said. I worked as a EMT for major productions like the Food Network, MTV, BET, man, you name it. It's movies, films, that was my job. And what you see, a series that may take, let's say, a year to play out, that series was done within days. Like you're expected to come in and you know that for that day, you're recording for 11 hours straight, and you only have a lunch break for an hour. If you're in a good production, some people don't have the budget for that, so they're gonna try to continue to work you. So as Blythe said, this is an industry thing. And like for me, that's why it's so important for me to work as a freelancer, because I know I'm gonna be working 11 hours straight. I know this is what and I've worked also and still work as a production assistant. So when I know that's what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take the job as a contract. Like, am I gonna do this for 3 months, 6 months? What does this look like, so that I can prepare myself? Because unfortunately, it's so enrooted in the system, it's hard to even advocate for. Like artists like Demi Lovato, who has bipolar as well, she talks about that. Like she has to ensure in her contract that she has a vacation, because she can't even advocate for this, because the next concert she goes to, it's enrooted there. And the next place she goes to, it's enrooted there. I feel like it's going to take a bunch of artists and famous people and the industry itself to stand up, kind of like what happened with porn. When porn wasn't using condoms, and I can speak about this because it was artistic, right? They were presenting it as art. And it wasn't until people started getting HIV, contracting it, and then they were the ones who were saying, no, this is an injustice. A lot of us are getting infected and it's costing our lives. It wasn't until then that you saw the industry, and you can do some research on this, that it took even Hollywood people to get involved to really change that industry and say, okay, no, we really have to do testings and condoms and follow protocols. Child labor. If you look at this, it wasn't until recent And when I'm saying recent, I'm not saying like the last 3 years, but definitely like the last 60 or so years, or even less than that, where we see child labor laws come into play in Hollywood. Because until then, kids were being burned out. They were worked nonstop. They were literally abused. So I think, like Blythe said, it's really going to take a movement, I believe, for that to change. But until then, what you can do for yourself is know, where do you stand? You know, can you handle freelance, or are you okay with contract? And like Blythe said, advocating for yourself. Like, make sure that's in your contract. If you have a contract saying, I need a 5-minute break after every session, you know, depending on your job, or this is how I work. This is my own contract, and voicing for yourself.
I think that's excellent advice, especially like brushing up on a little bit of legal terms. You can even watch videos online, or if you maybe have a friend that is legally experienced or knows about it, you can speak with them. But I think that's the best way to advocate, because it's binding. So then if they don't follow through, you can do something about that. And then another thing that I just thought of is, you can use your art as your advocacy. So the content that you create can inspire people to motivate change.
I love that.
Yeah, I feel like it's like the creative industry is like, in a way, at least with some people, some examples, it's like uniquely suited to have these problems, because a lot of people in those industries aren't like real employees of the company. They're like freelance, or they're doing contracts or something like that. So it's like kind of hard to like have a union, if that makes sense. So it's like very difficult to renegotiate the contracts, because they're kind of like, oh, they have all the money, and then you're just down there either and you can't really do as much about it as you can if like if you were like at a sales job or something like that. But I think however you get to being able to renegotiate contracts, I think a few important things. You guys mentioned vacation, and then I would also say like mental health services within the contract. So like if you're a musician and you need therapy, the record label can cover that, stuff like that. So I think it's and that's like, musicians are really prone to that, and I think the industry, they have the money, so I think they should start like covering some of that stuff.
Speaking of, Adele, it's reported that she travels with her therapist.
Yeah.
Adele is so wonderful. Like, sidebar, I got to see
Yeah.
her years ago.
I don't know if it's added to her contract, but it's awesome. She talks about she has extreme anxiety, especially right before she performs. And so I don't know if she still does it, but for a while she was traveling with a therapist, was what was reported.
Cool. So we have one more question, and then there are a few Q&A questions. This is kind of a more positive one. How do you know if you've recovered from burnout?
I think there's a range of recovery. So the most obvious one is that you feel like you want to create something again.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also simply being okay with the fact that you have to create something.
Mm-hmm.
I know definitely when I work on one subject for too long, like I'll use music as an example. I just kind of get to a point where I'm like, I don't even care about this song. And I know that sounds bad, but we've all been there. So I think when I consciously see that and I'm like, okay, I just was burned out. That might not be how I feel in 2 weeks. That's actually getting on the road to recovery.
That was perfectly said.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it can be difficult too, because sometimes like I'll work on something for a while, and then I'll get really anxious, and then I'll like take a short break, I'll come back to it, and then it seems fine, but then like 15 minutes later I'm back to like being burned out. So it's like it can be tricky to sometimes know that you're really recovered, or is it just like like you buy yourself a few more minutes of creativity and then you're back to like square one.
That's so true.
Okay, so I guess we can take a few of these. I think there's only a few of these here. So Brianna asks, I feel like because of lack of representation, underrepresented groups have put in so much more work to have a seat at the table. And sometimes this leads to burnout. Any comments, suggestions specifically for these artists?
Yes. I think so. I see myself as an overall like Renaissance kind of person. I just like a lot of different subjects, and where most of my professional experiences is as sort of a 360 performer, if you will. So I definitely don't see people like myself doing this, and it's very discouraging a lot of the time because I lose interest because I'm like, oh, there's no one that looks like me. No one cares. No one cares about my voice. I don't exist to the media. There's no like multi-ethnic female thing with my specific perspective and any other things about my identity. It's a whole mishmash of complications that the media refuses to acknowledge. So it often leads me down a path where I'm like, oh, that's not important because I don't fit into their box. That's not true. You are here for a reason. And no matter what you believe, the world does need you. It doesn't really need another artist, but it does need your perspective and what you bring to it. So I think trying to remember that, and if you need to, talking with other people who do similar things to what you do, it can really help you out and make you realize things that you could still be working on, but also all the areas where you have that, I guess, unique aspect that no one else can copy, even if they try.
And knowing that you can get paid just as good in other areas. For example, there's Hollywood artists that are now doing indie movies. But indies is like very represented. There's a lot of diversity in it. I know like now they're talking about reports that Latinx and other language movies, like Asian movies, so forth, they're making a lot of money. And YouTube is like a hit. And I know the corporations were trying to find a way to either buy it or how to get rid of it because there's so much power in it. One, but two, YouTube is like, a lot of people are really making good money. We hear about a lot of people who are buying their houses and cars just off YouTube. But YouTube was a platform that was created to bring that diversity because we're not seeing it in Hollywood. So knowing that you don't always have to go the avenue that provides you so much stress. I personally have to stand away from places that are very white-centered, racist, ableist, homophobic, and transphobic because it's like you said, it burns me out. I can't be creative. So I ended up finding spaces, and let me tell you, they pay me better. They pay me better. It's incredible. I found spaces that work with me being intersectional, and they love me as I am, 100% as I am. Like I can easily make more money an hour working with places that are intersectional, believe it or not, that with places that are like, oh, I want your art, but I don't want you as a color person. Or I want your art and it's okay that you're a color, but I don't want you as a non-binary person. So just knowing that you can decide who you work with, how you work, like, and Blythe talked about that, you know, what does the contract gonna look like, the negotiations are gonna look like, you know, and creating the space. Like if there isn't such space, And also, like Blythe said, like knowing that your voice matters, creating your own space as much as you're joining a space.
That's so true. It's important to work with people that respect you. That's essential. And if they don't, they're not worth it. So I advise you to walk away no matter who they are, because there are people that will respect you.
Yeah, that's definitely great. So there's one more question we have here from Emma. I don't know if y'all will have suggestions about this, but how do you navigate being a freelance artist when you have social anxiety and going after things is mentally draining?
I think there's a lot of anxiety that can go into the creative process for all of us. And then, especially if you're navigating other things, it can be like especially draining. I definitely have anxiety about creating as well. I don't have necessarily communication anxiety with people, but when I'm trying to think about, oh God, how am I going to promote this? Or like, oh, like I like promoting other people's stuff. I don't like promoting my thing. So basically, I hear you. I think that it's important to realize that, how do I say this? Like, you don't have to see it necessarily as going after things, even though it sort of is. You can kind of you can see it as representing your art, and you don't have to necessarily make it specific to you. So if I am going to market my next EP, I don't have to market it as, hi, I'm Blythe Schulte, blah 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 blah, I'm great, because that's not me, and that people will see that it's not authentic. But if I'm like, hey, this is a Halloween EP, it has creepy jazz blues, here you go, then that's more compelling in the end anyway. So I would say try to take on the personality of your art and what it represents, because that's probably wonderful. And you're not hiding behind it either, because it really is an extension of who you are. So I don't know. I hope that helps.
Yeah, and I also too have anxiety when it comes to posting like my poetry or sharing my poetry. I think what helps me personally is accountability. Like what Blythe was saying, like I have to make it by this date because I get invited to events to perform. So I'm like, I just got to get over it if I want to get paid, or if I'm trying to do something that's impactful, depending on the audience and what I'm being invited for. And that accountability helps me get over the anxiety. But then, like we just mentioned, Adele needed her therapist. I don't know if she still needs her therapist, to talk to her. Another way too is to create community. And that can be just one other person, by the way. Doesn't mean 5 people, unless you want to have 5 people or 10 people, where you can present it to those people that you trust, that you feel comfortable with, and that you can say, hey, what do you think about this? Because I know for me, that's helpful to hear other people say, oh, that's really good. And I study their faces. If their faces tells me something else, like they're like, that's really good, I'm like, oh no, your face is saying something else. And really see, and so I'm looking for a reaction, so that helps me. So I present it to them first before presenting my final project to the audience. So I guess, like, creating that community, or talking to someone else about the anxiety before, launching it. So those are like my own personal tips.
Yeah, those are great. So that's all we have. I want to thank everyone for coming out to watch, and I want to thank Blythe and Allilsa for contributing, and WebCon for hosting us. So, thanks everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you for doing the panel. So we're going to switch gears a little bit. And so our next panel will be Still More Animal Crossing by Sarah Kristen. And that will be starting very shortly, so stay tight. And I'm going to make you co-host, Sarah.